It's Holly from 50% Before 2050, and today I'm here to talk about 4 important things teachers have to consider when designing and selecting assessment for English learners: validity, reliability, authenticity, and cultural bias. The validity of a test is the extent to which it measures what it says it's going to measure. So while validity is important for all students, it is very important to consider validity when assessing English learners, since language proficiency can grossly affect the outcome of an exam. For example, if you want to test your English learner on a math standard, it's so important you're testing math and not their English proficiency level. A mathematics exam heavy in word problems may actually be measuring an English learner's ability to decode the academic language of mathematics rather than that student's ability to perform mathematical algorithms. You might not have to worry about this as much with your native English-speaking students, but validity is always important to consider. If you're using data from an assessment to determine whether or not your students have mastered something, you need to make sure that that test actually provides data on that something. Moving on to reliability. To quote an excellent resource published by the Educational Testing Service, which I will link below, reliability is the extent to which scores obtained on a specific form of an assessment can be generalized to scores obtained on other forms of the assessment, administered at other times, or possibly scored by some other raters. Or said more plainly, can the data from this test be used to make generalizations and comparisons? Standardized tests are designed with reliability in mind, but although reliability is important, some researchers believe some tests designed with reliability in mind have had to make sacrifices when it comes to how valid those tests are. I'll link that citation below for you as well. There's kind of a balancing act between validity and reliability, because although teachers want reliable data points, they also need those data points to be reliable, which brings us to authenticity. The authenticity of an exam can be determined by whether or not the exam asks students to do a subject, or just to show a proof. That is, an authentic assessment usually breaks free from the pencil and paper exam to require a product or a performance. Authentic assessments, by their nature, are more adaptable to the needs of English learners. They are also more motivating as they often allow students to use multiple pathways to show what they know. However, as authentic assessments are less standardized than, standardized tests, they may provide less reliable data, or they may suffer from issues with inter-rater reliability. Inter-rater reliability is the extent to which scores agree upon ratings given. For example, it would be problematic if a grade level team chose to use a performance assessment and created a rubric together, but applied that rubric much differently to the student work they graded, and arrived at different grades when looking at the same work. Moving on to our final topic of the day, cultural bias. You may like to believe that bias does not seep into the exams given to your students, but to quote Gottlieb, citation below, all tests associated with assessment of learning have some degree of bias. Assessment of learning refers to testing that is done without the input of or designed by teachers, such as the yearly high-stakes tests or interim quarterly measures done throughout the school year. Those tests are biased. Although test makers do strive to create bias-free exams, tests are designed with the cultural majority in mind: white, middle-class, native English-speaking students. Tests often assume students will have background knowledge about different concepts, places, events, and therefore things are referenced in test items without any explanation. That means that language arts test may not be testing whether or not your students can make a cohesive argument. It might be testing whether or not they have enough background knowledge about baseball. Don't believe me? Let's try this. I'm going to read you a passage, and I want you to see if you can summarize it. And I'll link below to the source where I found this. Having crumbled to 214 all out, with Jonathan Trott's 84 not out the glue across an otherwise brittle English innings, the tourists were back in the contest when Paul Collingwood's brace had the hosts wobbling at 100 for 5 at the turn of the 21st over. So, what could you tell me? Probably nothing, unless you were raised in England, India, Pakistan, or Australia, since I just read you a report on a cricket match. If you don't know much about cricket, then that probably meant nothing to you. A 5th grader in England would have no problem with that because they have the background knowledge. A test item over that passage would be biased against anyone unfamiliar with cricket, in the way that a test question over a passage about baseball would be biased against anyone without that cultural context. But moving on from passages, bias can present itself in other ways too. Idioms, for example. Imagine encountering something like bought the farm, feeling the blues, he's a ham, beating around the bush, when you're just learning the English language. Yikes! Complex noun phrases can also be terribly difficult to comprehend. Let's take some from Gottlieb's book. This is from a 5th grade passage about living in a treehouse, which, as you might be thinking, is a specific cultural thing that an English learner may have no background knowledge on. Here they are. Stepping out, treehouse architect, sound tough, no sweat, far bank. Imagine these word phrases using their individual meanings. Just take treehouse, for example. Let's not even consider architect added on there as a modifier. First, you have tree, then you have house. If you're an English learner, you might not realize that this means a house built in a tree. And if you don't, you're going to be so confused and start the exam already at a disadvantage. Tough, right? Friends, thank you for watching today. I hope this video has helped you learn something, think a little, and maybe even examine some of your beliefs about testing.